The old recording played on the screen and the room fell silent. Every officer at the table watched the grainy footage from 70 years ago. A massive ship drifted through space, broken and dark. Fire had torn through its middle sections. Bodies floated in the void around it. The colony ship New Dawn was dying, and 3,000 souls were dying with it. Captain Danny Moore had seen this recording many times. His grandmother had been on that ship. She was only 6 years old when the engines failed and the life support began to shut down. She remembered the cold. She remembered the adults crying. She remembered thinking she would never see another sunrise. Then the came. The recording showed their ships approaching. They were small vessels, nothing like the massive human colony ship. They were not a powerful species. They had simple technology and few resources. Their prime was a quiet place far from the busy trade routes of the galaxy. They had no reason to help the strange creatures drifting through their territory. But they helped anyway. The footage showed rescue teams cutting through the hull of the New Dawn. Their bodies were covered in soft blue scales, and their large dark eyes showed no fear as they pulled human survivors from the wreckage. They wrapped the freezing colonists in thermal blankets. They carried children in their arms. They gave their own food and medicine to complete strangers. A young healer named Lan had convinced her people to act. She was barely an adult by standards, but she had looked at the dying ship and refused to do nothing. She had argued with her elders. She had begged. She had reminded them that kindness was the foundation of their culture. And her people had listened. 3,000 human lives were saved that day. Danny's grandmother lived to see many more sunrises. She grew up, had children, and told them the story of the blue-scaled people who asked for nothing in return. The recording ended, and the lights in the conference room came back on. Admiral Chris Palmer stood at the head of the table. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in 3 wars during his long career. He had sent good people to their deaths. He had made hard choices that kept him awake at night. But this choice, he knew, would not be hard at all. "They are dying," he said. His voice was calm but heavy. "The Dominion has surrounded their planet. Nothing goes in. Nothing comes out. Their crops are failing. Their medicine is running out. In 6 months, maybe less, they will be gone." Lieutenant pulled up the tactical display. Red icons representing warships formed a tight circle around a small blue planet. There were dozens of them, armed and dangerous. "They want the crystal deposits beneath the surface of Prime," she explained. "The crystals are rare and valuable. They can be used to power weapons and shields. They have offered the choice. Give up the crystals and become slaves, or refuse and starve." "And asked Commander Ben Carter. He was a large man with a soldier's build and a strategist's mind. "They refused," said. "They said they would rather die free than live as property." The room was quiet again. Everyone understood what was being asked of them. The Dominion was powerful. They had conquered dozens of worlds. Their fleet was larger than anything humanity could match. Going to war with them would be costly. Many people would die. Dr. Lisa Grant spoke up. Her voice was soft but clear. "I've been studying them for years. They believe in strength above all else. They take what they want because they can. They have never encountered a species willing to fight for someone else's survival. They will not expect this." "They will think we are weak," Ben said. "Sentimental." "Yes," Lisa agreed. "They will be wrong." Danny Moore had been silent throughout the meeting. He was thinking about his grandmother. She had died when he was 15, but he still remembered her stories. She had described Lan's eyes, how they had looked at the frightened human child with such warmth. She had described the feeling of being lifted from the freezing ship and wrapped in soft fabric that smelled like flowers from another world. "They saved us," Danny said quietly. "When we were nothing, when we had nothing to offer them. We were strangers dying in the dark, and they gave us everything they had." He looked around the table at his fellow officers. Some of them had family members who survived the New Dawn disaster. Others had simply grown up hearing the story of thee and their kindness. "How can we do less?" Danny asked. Admiral Palmer nodded slowly. "I will take this to the council, but I already know what they will say." The vote happened 3 hours later. Every member of the council watched the same recording. They saw the same rescue. They heard the same story. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would go to war. Word spread quickly through the colonies. The kind people who saved the new dawn were in danger. Earth was sending help. Every ship that could fly was being called into service. People volunteered by the thousands. Soldiers who had retired years ago put on their uniforms again. Engineers canceled their vacations. Doctors packed their bags and headed for the nearest military base. Danny Moore stood on the bridge of his ship, the Starboard Hope, and watched his crew prepare for departure. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, but they were also determined. "Captain," said from her station, "the fleet is ready, 200 warships, 50 support vessels, medical frigates, supply carriers, troop transports, everything we have." Danny took a deep breath. Somewhere across the stars, a small blue planet was waiting for help that might never come. An ancient healer who had once saved a human child was now watching her people starve. She did not know that help was coming. She did not know that humanity remembered. "Set course for Prime," Danny ordered. "Maximum speed." The Starboard Hope jumped into the void, and 200 ships followed behind her. They flew toward war, toward death, toward a debt that was 70 years overdue. Humans do not forget those who helped them, and when the time comes to repay that kindness, they do not hesitate. They simply go. The stars had never looked so cold to Elder. He stood at the window of his chamber and watched the ships circle his world like hungry predators. They had been there for 3 months now. 3 months of fear, 3 months of hunger, 3 months of watching his people slowly fade away. They had offered them a choice, but it was no choice at all. Surrender the crystal mines and become slaves, or keep their freedom and starve. Had chosen freedom. His council had agreed. They would not bow to conquerors. But freedom meant nothing if everyone was dead. The crops had failed first. The ships blocked the sunlight with their massive hulls, casting shadows across the farmlands. Then the medicine ran out. The old and the sick began to die. Children cried from hunger. Parents held them close and whispered promises they could not keep. Was 300 years old. He had led his people through difficult times before, but he had never felt so helpless. A soft knock came at his door. He turned to see Lan enter the room. She was ancient now, even older than himself. Her blue scales had faded to gray, and her movements were slow and careful, but her eyes still held the same warmth they had always held. "You should rest," said. "I will rest when I am dead," Lan replied. "Until then there is work to do." She had been working in the refugee camps for weeks, healing the sick, comforting the dying, sharing her food with those who had none. She never complained, she never stopped. "Do you remember them?" asked the humans. Lan smiled softly. "I remember a little girl with yellow hair. She was so cold, so scared. I wrapped her in my mother's blanket and carried her to our ship. She held on to me like I was the only solid thing in the universe." "Do you think they remember us?" Lan looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond those cold lights, on a small blue planet called Earth, the children of the new dawn had grown into a civilization. They had built cities and ships. They had spread across the galaxy. They had become powerful. "I do not know," she said honestly. 70 years is a long time. Many things can be forgotten. But even as she spoke, she hoped she was wrong. She hoped that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, someone remembered the kindness her people had shown. Far away, Lieutenant was not sleeping. She sat at her communication station on the Starboard Hope, broadcasting a message across every frequency she could reach. The message was being sent to every corner of the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every planet with a receiver would hear it. This is the Earth vessel Starward Hope, leading a fleet of 200 ships to Prime. 70 years ago, they saved 3,000 human lives. They asked for nothing in return. Today, they face extinction at the hands of the Dominion. Humanity does not forget its friends. We are coming. She played the message again and again, knowing that it would reach ears, knowing that it would spread across the stars like wildfire, knowing that it would change everything. Commander Ben Carter worked without rest, coordinating the largest military operation in human history. Ships from every colony had answered the call. Warships armed with plasma cannons and missile batteries. Medical frigates filled with doctors and supplies. Troop transports carrying soldiers who had volunteered to fight and die for people they had never met. The logistics were a nightmare. Fuel had to be calculated. Formations had to be planned. Communication codes had to be synchronized. A single mistake could cost hundreds of lives. But Ben did not make mistakes. He had been trained for this. He had spent his entire career preparing for a moment when everything would be on the line. And now that moment had come. "Commander," one of his officers said, "we're receiving messages from the outer colonies. More ships want to join the fleet." "How many?" 37, mostly civilian vessels, cargo ships, passenger liners, even a few mining rigs. They want to help. Ben paused. Civilian ships had no place in a war zone. They would be easy targets for weapons. He should refuse them. But then he thought about they had been civilians too, 70 years ago. They had risked their lives to save strangers. They had asked for nothing in return. "Tell them to fall in behind the medical frigates," Ben said. "They can carry supplies and evacuate wounded, but they stay out of the fighting." "Yes, Commander." On the bridge, Captain Danny Moore studied the tactical display. The blockade was tight. 60 warships surrounded Prime, with more reinforcements available in nearby systems. They were well-armed and well-trained. But they did not know what was coming. Dr. Lisa Grant joined him at the display. She had spent the journey studying psychology, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. "They won't expect us to fight," she said. "In their culture, you only risk yourself for personal gain. Allies help allies because they expect something in return. The idea of sacrificing everything for a species that can't help you, it doesn't exist in their thinking." "That's their weakness," Danny said. "Yes, they'll assume we're bluffing. They'll think we'll back down when we see their numbers. They don't understand that we can't back down, that we won't." Danny nodded slowly. He thought about the people on his ship, young men and women who had families waiting for them back home, people with dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Some of them would not survive the coming battle. "Send a message to the fleet," he said. "Tell them what we're fighting for. Tell them about the new dawn. Let them know that whatever happens, we're doing the right thing." Nodded and began typing. The message went out to every ship in the fleet. 200 vessels received the same story, the same reminder, the same purpose. They were not fighting for territory. They were not fighting for resources. They were fighting because 70 years ago, a young healer with blue scales had looked at a dying ship full of strangers and decided to help. That was all the reason they needed. On Prime, a young sat beside Lan in the refugee camp. She was hungry and scared, and she wanted to understand. "Why did you help them?" she asked. "The humans, why did you risk everything for strangers?" Lan took the young one's hand in her own. Her grip was weak, but her voice was steady. "Because kindness needs no reason," she said. "You do not help others because they can help you. You help them because they need help. That is enough." The young looked up at the sky, where ships blocked out the stars. "Do you think anyone will help us?" Lan followed her gaze. Somewhere beyond those shadows, she believed, there were people who remembered, people who cared, people who would come. "Yes," she whispered, "I think they will." She could not know it yet, but 200 ships were already burning toward her world. 200 ships filled with humans who had not forgotten. Help was coming. High Arbiter sat on his command throne and listened to the human transmission. His bridge was dark and cold, the way all ships were designed. His officers stood at attention around him, waiting for his reaction. The message played again. A human voice, calm and clear, explained why 200 ships were flying toward Prime. It spoke of a rescue 70 years ago. It spoke of gratitude. It spoke of a debt being repaid. Began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a deep, rolling sound that echoed through the bridge. His officers exchanged confused glances, but none of them dared to speak. "Play it again," ordered. The message repeated. The human voice described the blockade and the suffering of the. It explained that humanity would not stand by while their friends died. It promised that the blockade would end, one way or another. Laughed even harder. "They risk their entire civilization," he said, wiping a tear from his eye, "for a species that cannot help them. A species with no military value, no strategic importance, nothing to offer." He shook his head in disbelief. The humans were a young species. They had only been traveling the stars for a century. They were small and soft and fragile, and now they were threatening the Dominion. "This is a joke," Admiral said. He was second in command, a battle-hardened warrior who had conquered a dozen worlds. "They cannot be serious." "Oh, they are serious," replied. "They are simply stupid. They believe that kindness is strength, that gratitude is worth dying for. They are children who do not understand how the galaxy works." In culture, everything was a transaction. You helped those who could help you. You protected those who had value. Kindness to strangers was a waste of resources. Gratitude to species who could not repay it was weakness. They had built their empire on this philosophy. They took what they wanted because they were strong. They crushed those who resisted because mercy was inefficient. They had never lost a war because they only fought wars they could win. And this war believed they could not lose. "How many ships do the humans have?" he asked. 200 warships, reported. 50 support vessels, medical frigates, supply carriers. They have brought everything. "Everything," repeated. "Their entire military strength, for a species of farmers and healers who live on a rock in the middle of nowhere." He stood from his throne and walked to the viewport. Prime hung in the darkness below, a small blue world with green continents and white clouds. It was beautiful in a way. They had taken good care of it. But beauty meant nothing to the. Only the crystals beneath the surface mattered. Only power mattered. "They will not back down," warned. "The humans, they seem committed." Of course they seem committed. They are young and foolish. They believe in honor and loyalty and other things that do not exist. When they see our numbers, when they understand what they face, they will retreat. And if they don't, turned to face his admiral. His eyes were cold and empty. "Then we will destroy them, and we will take Earth next." The fleet began to prepare for battle. Weapon systems powered up. Shield generators hummed to life. Fighters were loaded into launch bays. The 60 ships around Prime formed into combat formation. But something strange happened. As they prepared, other messages began to arrive. Not from the humans, but from species across the galaxy who had heard the transmission. A small trading federation sent a message of support. A peaceful colony of scientists expressed admiration. A group of refugee species, fleeing conquest, offered prayers for the human fleet. And then a message came from a warrior culture that had resisted expansion for centuries. "We have watched you for a long time, humans," the message said. "We thought you were soft, weak. We thought your kindness was a flaw. We were wrong. What you are doing, it is the bravest thing we have ever seen. We will remember this." Deleted the message in disgust. On the starward Hope, Captain Danny Moore received reports from the scout ships. The fleet was preparing for battle. They showed no signs of backing down. They think we're bluffing, said. They're wrong, Danny replied. He looked around his bridge at the crew who had volunteered for this mission. Navigator Jenny Hayes plotted their course with steady hands. Weapons Officer Mike checked the cannon systems for the 10th time. Chief Engineer Torres monitored the engines, ready to push them beyond their limits if necessary. They were all scared. Danny could see it, but they were here anyway. Captain said, I'm receiving a message from the flagship. High Arbiter is hailing us directly. Put him on screen. The display flickered and his face appeared. He was tall and angular with gray skin and sharp features. His eyes were like chips of ice. Captain Moore said, I wanted to see the face of the human who leads this foolish expedition. High Arbiter, Danny replied calmly. I wanted to give you one last chance to withdraw your ships. Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. You cannot win this fight, you know this. Your ships are outnumbered. Your weapons are inferior. Your people will die, and for what? For a species that means nothing. They mean something to us. Why, what have they given you? What can they offer? Danny thought about his grandmother. He thought about the stories she told him as a child. He thought about a young healer named Lan, who had wrapped a freezing girl in a warm blanket and carried her to safety. They gave us our lives, Danny said. 70 years ago, when we had nothing, they saved us. You want to know why we're here? Because we remember. Because gratitude is not weakness. Because some things are worth dying for. Smile faded. For a moment, something like confusion flickered in his eyes. He could not understand. In his entire life, no one had ever risked everything for something so intangible. Then you will die, he said, and your species will learn the price of sentiment. The screen went dark. Danny took a deep breath. The battle would begin soon. Many of his people would not survive. He knew this. He accepted it. But he also knew that some fights were not about winning. Some fights were about showing the galaxy what you believed in, what you stood for, what you were willing to sacrifice. All ships, he said into the fleet-wide channel, prepare for battle. Remember why we're here. Remember who we're fighting for. And remember this, whatever happens today, we do not retreat. We do not surrender. We go forward or we go down fighting. 200 voices answered him across the void. Yes, Captain. The fleet moved toward Prime, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The first shots were fired at dawn, though there was no dawn in space. There was only the flash of plasma cannons and the streak of missiles cutting through the void. The battle for Prime had begun. Captain Danny Moore gripped the arms of his command chair as the starward Hope shook from a near miss. A cruiser had targeted them, sending a barrage of energy blasts that lit up the darkness like lightning. Return fire, Danny ordered. Mike's fingers danced across the weapon's console. The Starward Hope's main cannons roared to life, sending streams of superheated plasma toward the enemy vessel. The cruiser's shields flickered and held, but the pressure was mounting. Across the battlefield, 200 human ships engaged the fleet. The humans were outnumbered and fighting in unfamiliar territory. By every logical measure, they should have been losing. But they had never fought an enemy like this. Commander Ben Carter coordinated the battle from his tactical station. He watched the holographic display as human ships moved in precise formations, working together like parts of a single machine. 3rd Squadron flank left. Draw fire from the medical frigates. 5th Squadron concentrate on the destroyer group. Don't let them reform. His orders went out and the fleet responded. Human captains who had never worked together moved as one. They covered each other. They sacrificed positioning to protect wounded ships. They refused to leave anyone behind. They fought with skill and power, but they fought as individuals. Each captain sought glory for himself. Each ship looked out for its own survival. When a vessel was damaged, the others did not stop to help. They pressed forward, leaving the wounded to fend for themselves. The humans were different. When the frigate Morning Star took critical damage, 3 destroyers moved to shield her. When the cruiser Brave Heart lost engine power, 2 ships locked onto her hull and dragged her out of the fire zone. When a medical transport was targeted by fighters, a squadron of human pilots flew directly into the enemy formation, sacrificing themselves to protect the doctors and wounded aboard. They did not understand. They had never seen anything like it. On the surface of Prime, Lan watched the sky burn. Flashes of light exploded above the clouds as ships died in the darkness. She could not tell which lights were human and which were. She could only pray. Around her, the refugee camp had gone quiet. Thousands have stood outside their shelters, looking up at the battle that would decide their fate. Children held their parents' hands. Elders whispered ancient prayers. No one spoke above a whisper. "Someone is fighting for us," a young said. "The humans, they came." Lan nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. 70 years ago, she had made a choice. She had convinced her people to help strangers who were dying in the dark. She had asked for nothing in return. And now, against all logic, against all expectation, those strangers had returned. The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell. Ships fell. The void filled with debris and bodies and the scattered remains of vessels that had once carried hundreds of souls. The Starboard Hope was hit hard in the 8th hour. A dreadnought breached her hull with a concentrated beam attack, tearing through 3 decks. Fire erupted. Atmosphere vented into space. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Danny was thrown from his chair. He hit the deck hard, feeling something crack in his ribs. Around him, his crew scrambled to contain the damage. Blood flowed from a gash on his forehead, but he pushed himself back to his feet. "Damage report," he gasped. "We've lost decks 7 through 9, Torres reported, his voice strained. "Hull breach in the engineering section. We're venting atmosphere. Casualty reports are still coming in, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Half the crew was gone. "Captain," said from her station, "the fleet is asking if we need to fall back. They can cover our retreat." Danny looked around his broken bridge. Jenny Hayes was still at navigation, bleeding from a wound on her arm but refusing to leave her post. Mike was working the weapons console with one hand, the other pressed against a burn on his side. Every person on the bridge was wounded. Every person was still fighting. He thought about the below. He thought about Lan, the ancient healer who had saved his grandmother's life. He thought about 3,000 people who would have died in the cold darkness of space if one young alien hadn't decided to help. "No retreat," Danny said. "We finish this." The Starboard Hope pushed forward. On the flagship, High Arbiter watched the battle with growing unease. His fleet was winning. The human ships were taking heavy damage. By every measure, they should have felt confident. But the humans would not break. Every time a human ship was destroyed, the others fought harder. Every time they seemed to gain an advantage, the humans adapted. They were losing dozens of vessels, thousands of lives, and still they came. Still they fought. "They are insane," Admiral muttered. "They should retreat. They should surrender. Why won't they stop?" Had no answer. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had faced warriors and soldiers and desperate defenders. He had never faced an enemy who simply would not give up. "Push harder," he ordered. "Break their formation, destroy their flagship." The dreadnoughts advanced, concentrating fire on the Starboard Hope. The human vessel shook under the assault. Fires burned on multiple decks. Systems failed one by one. The ship was dying. But Danny Moore did not order a retreat. "All remaining weapons target the lead dreadnought," he said. "Everything we have." The Starboard Hope fired her last missiles. Her remaining cannons blazed. The attack was desperate, a final punch from a fighter who refused to stay down. The dreadnought's shields collapsed. The human missiles struck home, tearing through the enemy vessel's hull. Explosions rippled along its length. The dreadnought listed, then began to break apart. The fleet hesitated. Their flagship had been damaged. Their strongest vessel was falling, and the humans, battered and bleeding and broken, were still coming. For the first time in the battle, they felt something they had never felt before. Fear. On Prime, a cheer rose from the refugee camps. They could see the formation breaking. They could see the enemy ships starting to pull back. They could see hope. Lan fell to her knees, overwhelmed by emotion. She looked up at the sky, at the lights still flashing in the darkness, and she whispered words she had not spoken in 70 years. "Thank you," she said to the humans she could not see. "Thank you for remembering." The battle was not over. Many more would die before it ended. But in that moment, everyone watching knew the truth. They had lost. Not because they lacked ships or weapons or skill. They lost because they had faced something they could not understand. Gratitude. And gratitude, it turned out, was stronger than fear. The broke in the 14th hour of battle. High Arbiter stood on his damaged bridge and watched his fleet crumble. 30 ships destroyed. 12 more too damaged to fight. The humans had lost more, far more, but they kept coming. Every time he thought they would retreat, they pushed harder. Every time he thought they would break, they found new strength. He did not understand. Why, he demanded of the empty air. Why do they sacrifice so much for a species that cannot help them? What do they gain from this? Admiral had no answer. No did. In their culture, every action had a purpose. Every sacrifice had a price. You did not give your life for nothing. But the humans were giving their lives for nothing, for gratitude, for memory, for a debt that had been paid in full 70 years ago. It made no sense. And yet somehow it was working. "Order the retreat," said quietly. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Sir could not believe what he was hearing. "The retreat," repeated. "All ships fall back to space now." The order went out. Across the battlefield, vessels turned away from Prime. They fled into the darkness, leaving behind the wreckage of their ambition. The humans did not pursue. They had not come for conquest. They had come to save their friends. On the bridge of the Starboard Hope, Danny Moore watched the enemy retreat. His ship was barely holding together. Half his crew was dead or wounded. He himself was covered in blood, most of it his own. But they had won. "They're leaving," whispered, her voice cracked with emotion. "They're actually leaving." Danny nodded slowly. He should have felt triumphant. He should have felt proud. Instead, he only felt tired. Tired and sad and grateful that it was over. "Get me a channel to the fleet," he said. His voice went out to every ship in the human formation. Some of those ships were burning. Some were barely functional. Some had lost so many crew that there was barely anyone left to hear. "This is Captain Moore," Danny said. "They are retreating. Prime is safe. We did it." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I know we lost friends today. Brothers and sisters who gave everything for people they never met. I want you to know that their sacrifice meant something. Because of them, an entire species will live. Because of them, the galaxy will remember what humanity stands for. We don't forget our friends. We don't abandon those who helped us. And when someone we love is in danger, we come, no matter the cost." He took a deep breath. "Begin landing operations. Get the medical supplies to the surface. Let them know that they're safe now. Let them know that we remembered." The first human shuttles landed on Prime 2 hours later. They carried food and medicine and engineers ready to rebuild. They carried doctors who would heal the sick and wounded. They carried hope. Dr. Lisa Grant led the medical team to the largest refugee camp. She had studied them for years, but she had never met one in person. Now she walked among them, seeing their tired faces and grateful eyes. A crowd gathered around the human shuttles. Children stared at the strange creatures who had come from the stars. Elders wept openly. Young adults reached out to touch the humans, as if to make sure they were real. And then Lisa saw her. An ancient with gray scales and clouded eyes, moving slowly through the crowd with the help of a young attendant. She was frail and bent with age, but her face held a quiet dignity that Lisa recognized immediately. Lan, the healer who had saved the New Dawn, the woman who had convinced her people to help strangers 70 years ago, the reason humanity had come. Lisa walked toward her, her heart pounding. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it was here, she could barely speak. Lan, she said softly. The ancient looked up. Her eyes, though clouded, seemed to focus on Lisa's face. You came, Lan whispered. I did not believe it. I hoped, but I did not believe, and you came. Lisa knelt before her, taking the old healer's hands in her own. You saved us, Lisa said. 70 years ago, when we were dying in the dark, you saved us. You asked for nothing in return. Did you really think we would forget? Tears streamed down Lan's face. I only did what was right. Any decent person would have done the same. No, Lisa said. Not any person. You convinced your people to help strangers. You gave us everything you had. You showed us what kindness really means. She squeezed the old woman's hands. We lost 60 ships today. 4,000 of our people died defending your world. And if we had to do it again, we would. Because that's what you taught us. Kindness is not weakness. Gratitude is not foolishness. Some things are worth fighting for. Lan could not speak. She simply held Lisa's hands and cried. Word of the battle spread across the galaxy like fire. Every species heard the story. The humans, a young civilization barely a century old, had sent their entire fleet to defend a planet that could offer them nothing in return. They had lost thousands of lives. They had risked everything. And they had won. They had retreated. The mighty conquerors who had crushed 100 worlds had been stopped by a species fighting for gratitude. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Other species took notice. The weak, the forgotten, the abandoned. They saw what humanity had done and they wondered. They wondered what it would be like to have friends who remembered, friends who would come when you needed them. 1 year later, Admiral Chris Palmer addressed a gathering of 12 species who had come together to form the Galactic Kindness Accord. It was a simple agreement. If any member species faced extinction, the others would come to help. No questions asked. No payment required. They believed that gratitude was weakness, Palmer said. They were wrong. Gratitude is memory. It is loyalty. It is the promise that someone somewhere will answer when you call. He looked out at the assembled delegates, human and alien alike. We are not strong because we have weapons. We are strong because we have each other, and that is something no empire can ever take away. On Prime, a statue stood in the Capitol Square. It depicted a human hand clasping a claw, reaching across the void that had once separated them. The inscription at the base was simple. They remembered. Lan visited that statue every morning until her final day. She never regretted saving those strange, pink-skinned creatures who had drifted into her territory 70 years ago. She never regretted convincing her people to help strangers who could offer nothing in return. Because in the end, those strangers had become family. And family never forgets. On the day Lan died, surrounded by loved ones both and human, she closed her eyes with a smile on her face. Her last words were soft, almost too quiet to hear. Kindness needs no reason, she whispered, and sometimes it comes back to save you. The galaxy remembered her for 1,000 years. And humanity never forgot.